Everyone, my name is Gail Sloan. Hopefully you haven't forgotten who I am over the holidays, and I'm the CEO of Waste Management and Resource Recovery Association of Australia. I'm so excited to be kicking off 2021 with such an important topic for our essential industry. We all know how important data is, knowing what we do and being able to prove what we do in an evidence-based world. I think probably nearly everyone on this call is as excited about data as I am. I think it's so important as we continue to promote, discuss our industry with others outside of it. We've gone way beyond the barbecue conversation, I think, to mainstream conversations in the industry. To have data that we can point to that ideally at some stage is standardized and timely is so important to everything we do, the planning that we do, the investment that we make. So Joe is my number one go-to for Data Geek, and I didn't realize I was a geek until I met Joe, but it's great. So thank you so much for making the time to attend today to this webinar. All right, so without any more delay, you've had enough of me. I'd very much like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Joe Pickin. Joe is a director of Blue Environment Strategic Environmental Consultant. He is a waste and resource recovery specialist, Joe, not just waste, with a PhD on environmental economics of waste and resource recovery, and has 25 years experience as a sector as a research analyst and consultant. Joe was the primary author of the National Waste Reports in 2016, 18 and 20, and he was also an advisor on ABC's War on Waste. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks to Emma for hosting this event for us. Now, I'll just share my screen. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about the National Waste Report, which Blue Environment prepared on behalf of the Department of the Environment, Agriculture, Water and the Environment, released last year. So, National Waste Reporting is produced every couple of years. It's a commitment under the National Waste Policy Action Plan. I'm the lead author of the report, and it's supported by my Blue Environment colleagues and sub-consultants, Ascend, Envisage Works and Industry Edge, who all provided important contributions. I'll talk about some of the main findings, and I plan to talk for about half an hour, a bit more, and then take questions. There's 110 pages and appendices, a lot of stories in there, so of course we won't get through everything, but I'm happy to take questions on the whole scope. And on the subject of scope, I'll open up by just saying what it is that we cover in the National Waste Report. And, the definition of waste and what people refer to as waste varies from across jurisdictions. So this is our scope. We have the familiar, where it comes from, we call the streams, municipal, commercial and industrial waste, construction and demolition waste. Then we have the wastes themselves and different categories and types, and then we have what happens to it. Now we break this up in a bit more detail. We expand the scope a bit more than lots of people are familiar with in the states and territories. In particular, ash is included from electricity generation, and we have also included mining waste and mineral processing waste and some agricultural and fisheries. Now these things, I'm just going to put my laser pointer on. These ones here are not part of the main scope that we report. We sort of report them to the side in effect, but we include something there and some interesting findings. So the waste categories and types, the core wastes, what we call core waste is basically the stuff that the waste industry covers. By and large, that's what we include, and the stuff that states and territories report. These are familiar categories. I won't run through them all. One difference is that in the Commonwealth system, hazardous waste is included together with other wastes. In fact, there's a bit of a wonder why is that not done across all the states and territories. Is perhaps a bit of a question. It's mainly historical, different regulations covering it and so on. But anyway, for us, it's included. Then there's all these non-core wastes that we include: ash, as mentioned, red mud, brines from coal seam gas, and some organic waste, although we get in definitional difficulties very easily once you start including agricultural wastes. It's difficult to say where waste stops and organic start. We've got something on liquid wastes, and we talk about waste products as well, which kind of overlap with the materials. Let's say e-waste is made out of plastics, glass and metals, but people want to know about e-waste by itself. So we include that, cautious as we can be, not to overlap and not to double count. In waste management, we have this distinction of pathways and fates, and we think that this is going to become into, hopefully get more currency over time. Pathways is the stuff that doesn't end the story of a waste. It's something along the journey. So things like a material recovery facility, it still can be considered waste when it comes out the back end of that. Until this stuff is sorted and processed further. So we call that a pathway, and the fates that we refer to: resource recovery, consisting of recycling and energy from waste combined, disposal, and we also have long-term storage, because some stuff, like red mud in particular, very large quantities of it, is not really disposed of, it's just sitting there in an approved long-term storage. Okay, so that's the scope of what we're going to be talking about. This slide now shows you where we get the information from. Well, of course, it all comes from industry in the beginning. They provide data to the states and territories, sometimes through compulsory systems, more and more through compulsory systems. But by and large, landfill is compulsory across most of the country. Recycling and energy recovery data, less so, but it is in New South Wales, Queensland, and it's been phased in some of the other states too. That's the trend. This data that we collect is supplemented by various industry surveys and other national data, such as the plastics survey of biosolids, ash. And this lot goes into two big Excel tools. The hazardous waste data goes into a specific one, which then feeds into the National Waste Reporting Tool, which contains all the non-hazardous waste data. There's a whole bunch of manipulations, conversions, gap filling, and QA in producing this. The reason being that states and territories don't all have comprehensive and identical systems. So there's some sort of interpretation, that means that, that means that. Oh, we're missing data from, I don't know, let's say outside Darwin, the rest of NT, so we do some extrapolations, etc. In the end, we have a national waste database, which has the data in it, which we use for the National Waste Report. So that's the story where it all comes from to start with. And I think as well, it is worth talking at this stage, being data geeks, as Gail said, that we talk about the quality of this data. Now, I'm happy to say it's the best national data collation to date. It is an improvement on previous ones. We have data accessible through the National Waste Database in a pretty much consistent collation method going back to 2006-07. 3 years are missing from that trend, but it's a reasonable data set now. However, as per the list in the report, there are various difficulties there. There's some gaps. There's some risks of double counts that we have to make sure we don't count twice. For example, using hazardous waste tracking to understand contaminated soils, but also having landfill data. We have to try and make sure that we balance those up. There are still some risks, despite the efforts we make to try and kill those double counts. The measurement of recycling is a tricky one, and one which I think we are going to be pushing into further over the coming years to try and get this bedded down, because where do we count when something is recycled or not? What we try to do is when it's going into the process that ends the waste and turns it into a product, and we have what's going in net of residuals. So that's what we try and collect. I'm not sure we get it every time. Sometimes it's hard to do that, particularly when some states and territories have got voluntary reporting systems. Inconsistent attribution of source stream, what's municipal and what isn't. Let's say skip bins. It's not always the same. And one real area we've really got to fix, I think, is reporting of stockpiling. That is waste that's generated in 1 year and something happens to it in other years. We're not very good at working out how do we account for that, and it complicates things, and we're just going to have to face that complication and move that better. At the moment, we have a crack at it, but there's probably some difficulties related to that. There's quite a bit of estimating and extrapolation, and we made a bit of a stuff up with ties to energy recovery data. It's reported in that table. And a national standard for waste data reporting is in preparation. We're working on it now, so we should improve these things over time. Okay, enough of the introduction, and let's get to the nitty-gritty of it. So this is the contents of the National Waste Report. There's a lot of stories here. As I said, liquid waste, and we've got end-of-life products and packaging. But the main bits that we're going to be focusing on, the core, the main reporting is in these areas here: waste generation, recycling, energy recovery, disposal, resource recovery and recycling rates, and waste materials analysis, in which the focus is what we've called core waste plus ash. Okay, so let's have a look. Oh, and we've got this slide too first. Now, this is a Sankey diagram. If you're not familiar with Sankey diagrams, everyone's fallen in love with Sankey diagrams, and we're all data geeks, so I'm sure you've seen them. The thickness of these arrows is proportional to the mass that's passing through them. So it gives you a visual presentation of what's happening on a mass scale. So here's municipal waste, commercial, industrial, construction, demolition. The yellow is recycling, the red is disposal, the blue is recycled product moving around, or semi-processed materials. So, you know, this is construction and demolition waste here, and etc. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail here, but I just want to show you that's there. It's a good visual picture. When the recycling crisis hit, this was used a bit to try and contextualize, okay, so what is going to China? And it was a fraction of this stuff up here, and it was able to show the politicians, oh, it's not everything that's recycled is going to China, and it was able to sort of give people a bit of a visual context. So study that at your leisure. Now, to the nitty-gritty of it, this is our estimate of waste generation in Australia in 2018-19. In this core waste plus ash scope. There's the core waste, and there's the ash, and this is 2018-19, and this is it broken down by material type. So there's the ash on the top, hazardous materials there, masonry, metals, organics, paper and cardboard, and so on. 74 million tons is a bit more than last time, so we can see now, we'll see that in the trend in a second. But I want to point out to this one, the first time in this report that we've had a serious crack at estimating total quantities of mining waste, which means stuff that's processed and goes back into, mainly into tailings dams. Here's the core waste plus ash. So here's this lot represented in this area there. So you can see that whereas we've got 74 million tons of that, when you stick the mining waste on the top, it goes up to 630 or thereabouts. So there's very large quantities of that. There's a fair bit of agricultural waste there, and this is mineral processing. This is mostly red mud, and I think probably more than half of it. So there's a lot of mining waste. Now, we don't know much about that. We had a good method of doing this. We used the National Polluted Inventory, which has just the substances, but then we used reports from WA, and thank you to them for helping us out with this, to calibrate those NPI numbers to actual reported waste quantities, giving us a factor that we can then apply across the rest of the country. So I think that's probably a reasonable method, and gives us a reasonable estimate there. A lot of mining waste. Okay, now here's waste generation trends 2006-7 to 18-19, and we're looking at this core waste plus ash scope. We haven't got mining waste and all the rest of it in here. Now you can see that on an absolute level, we're looking here, we had increase, level off, big increase for these years here. And looking at this, you can see that it's mainly traceable to construction and demolition waste. This is on a per capita basis, so we're taking out population growth in effect and looking at how things are going, and you can see there was, according to this, a decline followed by a rise again associated with this same thing. We're breaking this up now at the bottom here by source stream. So commercial and industrial rising gently, and when you look at the per capita basis, you can see that it's rising gently, approximately in line with population. Municipal waste, a definitive decline, really, you would have to say. Now, and it goes against some people think, what, really? It's going down? How come I'm getting all these bins then? But remember, this is mass, and it's not necessarily the same as volume. The disappearance of paper, glass, I think, declining too, and probably a whole bunch of things getting lighter. In fact, we were just struggling to get into my wasabi pot. You know, plastic seems to be getting lighter and lighter, but still hard enough to get into. So there's probably more of it, but in volumetric terms, but not in mass terms. There's a little blip there, is probably associated with an error or rather historical double counting of organics. This is a finding from New South Wales. When they shifted from voluntary to compulsory reporting, they realized that they had been historically overcounting organics because it moves between different facilities and they weren't doing the subtraction. So once they went into it, they found some of that, and so we haven't managed to correct for that. It's a lesson for all those states that still do voluntary reporting of how it's easy to double count. Now, I also got ash in there just to complete this picture, and you can see a decline there. Really, this is associated with power station closures over time. Next one then, recycling of core waste. We're talking about 43 million tonnes. Here's the breakdown. Here we've got by state and territory as well as by stream and by material. You can see that the bulk of this is C&D, construction and demolition waste, and hence material-wise, masonry materials is prominent. Fair bit of ash, a lot of organics, and of course lots of metals. We've always been good at recycling metals, and paper and cardboard. Recycling trends show a long-term increase. This is a sunny story in a way. In fact, Gail said, "Oh, come on." She didn't believe me, did you, Gail? But in the long-term trend, this is what it seems to be saying. Now, of course, this is including population. Here it is without, and we've still got overall climbs. Now, this lump here is associated with the same thing that's got increased generation. That is construction and demolition waste, and we're good at recycling that stuff. Here we are again, broken down by these different streams. Look at that for construction demolition waste. What a massive increase. Now, some of this might be soil and processing of soil, but not most of it. It's going to be concrete and stuff going into road-based products and so on. C&I waste leveled off, so we've probably got a bit of an issue there. And municipal waste, this is the same blip I referred to before, which is probably an overcount of New South Wales, or a correction of an overcount of New South Wales organics, possibly metals too. So that blip we can ignore, but if we just go along on the overall trend, we can see we are still getting it's a slight decline in recycling rates. This one I'm not so sure about, but I think we know the story for municipal waste recycling. It hasn't moved an awful lot in recent times, except now FOGO has started to come in. And there's ash. So again, just to complete the picture, bouncing around a little bit. I won't focus on that too much. Okay, trend in exports of recovered materials. This is worth thinking about because of the China crisis and the forthcoming bans. So here's metals, not much affected by the bans. The bans came in about there. So you can see this effect. Already paper and cardboard was coming off the boil from an export perspective, but that might be reduced generation of that material. Partly, but definitely there's a bit of an impact of the recycling exports issue in there. Similarly, plastics. Now, in the first years after the China ban, I think everybody knows we managed to get it to Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, various other places. They are starting to close their borders now, and that is the upshot, a significant decline in the quantities of plastics. Tires too, although that's bounced around a bit anyway, but also declining. Textiles too. And glass, well, they discovered their export market and then they got banned. So that's well, the volumes are never that big anyway, so particularly as a proportion of the total. Worth thinking about, okay, so we recycle all this stuff. How much of each material type do we actually export? This is total recovery, and this is exported, comparing them. Now we'll put a table in which will help you see that a bit better. Main things here, and these are the main, probably the main commodity types: glass, metals, paper, plastic, textiles, tires. Estimated proportion exported. The big ones then: metals, more than half; plastics, almost half; paper, a third; textiles, almost all is going overseas when we're recycling it. But obviously, there's some other very large streams that in the core materials are not exported at all. So there's plenty going on apart from exports, but for some waste streams, there's a lot And obviously those ones face a significant challenge, particularly paper and plastics on here, and tires. So here's the trend in waste disposal. We looked at generation. We're not looking at energy recovery because we don't have time and it's a small part anyway, but the trend in waste disposal, again, matching the recycling is at least over this whole time period, the story you'd hope to see, declining quantities. But the decline looks like it's stopped, and here it's looking like it's picking up a little bit. Not when you look at it on a per capita basis, though. It still looks like disposal is falling. Now, disposal isn't just landfill, and in fact, it isn't all landfill, because some landfill is used for energy recovery, and in the Commonwealth method, we subtract that and add it to energy recovery. It works at a few percent of the total that goes to landfill. And there's also incineration without energy recovery and so on of hazardous waste that's in this totals, but that's small. Okay, on by stream, you can see the story there. Most of these are fairly level. Municipal waste definitely going down. C&D waste, slight decline on a per capita basis, and C&I too. So really, this is telling not too bad a story overall. And here's ash. So again, a bit of a decline there over the whole period, and a little bit in recent years too. Okay, recovering and recycling rates by jurisdiction. This is the bit where the state and territory representatives get nervous, and some start mumbling about, yeah, but are they measuring it the same way we are? Which is a fair enough question, because we don't know that for sure, or we don't know with great confidence, but this is the best we can do. I think it's fairly reasonable. South Australia doing a great job, as it has done for a long time. ACT back up there, it fell down last time because of Mr. Fluffy. Asbestos waste was so big there, chopping down houses because of asbestos in them. New South Wales and Victoria, pretty similar. And then WA, Queensland, TAS and Northern Territory, with an average for Australia recovery rate 63% and recycling rate 60%. By stream, C&D has got the best recovery rate, followed by C&I and MSW the worst, even though it gets the most focus. So there's still plenty of that going. Of course, there's definitional issues here too. You see this bit at the top there, this is mostly landfill gas recovery. So it's mostly food and paper from municipal streams and the gas getting collected there. By material type, I've got a few charts here. And there's a few stories you can see straight off there. Metals, for example, look, hardly any landfill, mostly recycled. There's that big blip there. I did wonder about that at first, but I was assured, no, that's because that's when the price shot up and whenever we pulled everything out their paddocks that we hadn't recorded as generated previously. Organics, a reasonable story being told there for organics, with landfill declining. That's what we want to see. And landfill, an ongoing, really, well, I think we all know a lot about plastics now, much more than we used to, and the recovery rate is very poor. Paper and cardboard is doing reasonably well, quantities leveling off, slightly declining, glass similar. Masonry materials, the boom, there we go. Okay, now I'm going to talk about material flow analyses. How am I going on time, Carmen? Okay, all right, material flow analyses we did for glass, metals, paper and cardboard, plastics and tires. And when I say material flow analysis, I mean we didn't just focus on the waste, we went back to the beginning. Where does it come from? How is it consumed? And how much recycled content is there? Now, we had a sub-consultant, Carlo Farrell, working on this for us, and put quite a bit of effort into it. Now, everybody's interested in circular economy at the moment. It's the buzz phrase of the decade, and it's the concept which is galvanized people's interest in managing material flows. And we all want circular economy indicators. States and territories are working hard at this, but it's difficult because of imports and exports. We don't know what comes into a state and what goes out of a state to other states. For a country, we do. So it's easier to do it on a national level. And hence we have a selection of potential circular economy indicators that we've used for building these material flow analyses. And then we've got this wonderful Sankey diagram underneath to tell the story of what happens. This is plastic, so imported primary material and recycled material, stuff going to manufacturing. Here's recycling. And here's stocks, and here's stuff going to landfill, here's stuff recycled, and so on. So it's basically telling the story of what happens with plastics in this country in 2018-19. We've got a similar one here for metals, just telling a lot happier story in terms of most of it is there's this red arrow is a lot smaller than the yellow and the blue ones. So anyway, look, I'm not going to focus on those, just to draw your attention to them. And because we've got the advantage of doing this on a national level as opposed to the states and territories, and it's easier, hopefully we can sort of push. We're hoping we've pushed things along, and that we can talk to people about these different indicators and see how they develop over time, and see if we can duplicate them on the state and territory level. Now, we have a national food waste strategy, so it's worth having a think about food waste and its management separately, and we have done here. So the chart on the left is food waste excluding food-derived hazardous waste, which is grease trap and abattoir and so on, food processing waste. And you can see it's not so happy, really, is it, as a story? We don't recycle much of it. 2018-19, there's a little bit of energy recovery on the top, but most of it is going into landfill. Now, this is management rather than fate. So this is actually means it goes into landfill. This means it goes into recycling. This means it goes to energy recovery operations. When we put that into food-derived hazardous waste, and we stick that in on the top, recycling bumps up a lot. Grease trap and abattoir waste, these sorts of things are generally recycled, or a bit of it goes through some sort of treatment process. So overall, you can see there's a lot of work to do with food waste, and that's one area, of course, where a lot is being done too. Okay, now comparing these results internationally, it's pretty difficult, because just as states and territory data systems vary, there's even more variation across countries. Even within the EU, you don't sort of get a very consistent basis all the time. So we've picked some countries where we could drill into the detail to such an extent that we could make sure that what we were comparing was comparing fairly with them. So we had to eliminate some things from the Australian data there. But if you just ignore the fact this is different from the main data set we showed, you can see here that we're looking at kilograms per capita here, that Australia's performance is probably, it's nothing to sing about, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about either. We're somehow in the middle. We've got less energy recovery, we've got less incinerators and so on than many other countries. We've got some under construction now. Therefore we got some more landfill with the energy, the generation rate's probably a bit high, less than the United States. Okay, now moving on outside those main areas to the local government waste management section. So I'm just showing a few snippets now over the rest of the slides I'm going to show, but this is worth having a look at. Curbside organic services 2018-19, and I'm splitting this into the total percentage of households that have got some sort of organic service. South Australia has got the most, Victoria and New South Wales are second. And the other thing that's worth looking at is the break between those with food and garden organics collection and those with only garden organics. And as you can see, the FOGO, food and garden organics, is mainly a southeast corner of Australia phenomenon at the moment, with some uptake. WA's now got some serious commitments, and Tas is bringing it in too. But that's a story at the moment. It's picked up in the southeast corner and spreading from there. Altogether, about half of Australia has got access to a garden organics bin, and about out of that, most of them is just garden organics. Here's domestic curbside bin services overall by the proportions of households. So you can see there's the garden organics, not with any breakup, and the ends green. Yellow is recycling, the red is disposal. And you can see, interesting, that nearly everybody who's got a garbage bin has got a recycling bin. The difference between these two is pretty small. And they're all pretty much, most people have got it. Overall, 97% people have got a garbage bin, 93% a recycling bin. New South Wales is a bit of an outlier there for reasons I have yet to understand. If somebody knows, let me know. I did check the data, and I was assured it was correct. Okay, so what do we put in our curbside recycling bins? This is coming data from New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Vic and WA. We haven't averaged or anything, we've just presented the range. So by weight, 41% to 54% paper and cardboard, no doubt reducing. Probably some of this range is because some of these data may be a bit older than other data. Then we've got glass, 21 to 31%, plastics, 7 to 10, metals 3 to 4, contamination 10 to 18. Now that includes non-recyclable paper, cardboard, glass, plastics, and metals. That is stuff that goes through and doesn't get recycled, even if it's the right material. It would be good to be able to break those two things up, improve the data in that way, but we don't have that with great confidence right now. National product stewardship schemes. Now, when I started working on this, I was surprised that it was actually quite hard to get this. I basically had to just trail around and say, do you know of any product stewardship schemes? Because there's no sort of centralized register. There is, of course, national legislation that's been there for quite a number of years now, but that only at the moment has 2 schemes. All the rest of them, even ones that are government initiated, such as the one for medicines and for waste oil, are not under the Product Stewardship Act. Anyway, that's been revoked now and incorporated into the new Act. So, and I understand that that's going to beef things up quite a lot. So this column will look a bit different next time, but there is a whole pile of different systems. Some of them obviously incredibly sophisticated, such as the Australian Packaging Covenant, you know, a dedicated organization, and other ones are really very small and sometimes barely running, but they're still somehow registered, and they say and they can provide us with data when we ask them. So anyway, hopefully this is going to be a little bit more tightened up, but it is worth seeing. There is a wide range of different schemes happening with a whole range of products. I even overlooked one. I found out about it afterwards. Refrigerant Reclaim Australia, which should have been in this list as well. There might be others. Again, if you know of some, I missed some, I'm pleased to hear about it. We also have data there on how many tons are collected and the estimated capture rate of the target materials. It would be nice to have this regularly reported as part of some sort of standard. Okay, container deposit schemes. Operational now or in 2018-19 in ACT, New South Wales, NT, Queensland and South Australia, and we collected data or looked at the annual reports of all of those and estimated the total quantity of collected containers. That's all in numbers of containers rather than tons, unfortunately for us, but we are able to estimate the overall return rate from that, in which NT comes out as the shining star according to this data set. Followed by South Australia. Now, these are the 2 oldest schemes, and that might be something to do with that. Followed by New South Wales, ACT, and Queensland was only for part of the year, so that's obviously going to be a bit less. Okay, another thing that's worth thinking about with container deposit schemes is what is the impact, and we've got some interesting data from New South Wales on that, showing really, well, okay, what happens when you implement a curbside system, a CDS system? This is the total quantity of that material type, and this is what's collected through the old curbside collection system. So you can see effectively material has been stolen from the yellow bin for glass and is going instead into the CDS system, but that's not the whole story. There's a lot more of it appearing as well. So the CDS is having success in not just taking stuff out of yellow bins, but also producing more. Plastics, there's less of an increase, minus a 15% reduction in curbside, but 6.4%. When I say plastics, I mean all recyclable plastics. Of course, some of those are not part of the CDS. So that probably explains why that percentage is lower. Aluminium, on the other hand, 145% increase in the total quantity. And since this is where significant from a greenhouse perspective, recycling, that's a really good outcome. And only 14% reduction in what went into the yellow lidded bins. Okay, now pretty much finished now, but I do want to have a plug first for the National Waste Database. As I mentioned at the beginning, this data, what we do is we process the data and we put it in this National Waste Database, and that generates all the charts and all the rest of it that we use in the report. This is published separately. It's a flat database, which means this is the structure of it. And it means anybody can do their analysis. It contains data from 2006-7 to 18-19, excluding the 3 years that are missing from that. But you can pull up all sorts of things there. Now, the first version of this was a bit, wasn't so greatly laid out. It's a lot better now, and we've got how to use guidance in it. The issue is that some things, we have the category, but we don't have types that match up, or we have the total, but we don't have the stream broken up. And rather than making estimates there, we've just put it in holus bolus. It means that you just got to be careful when you're doing the analyses. But for consultants in particular, you might find this useful. Anybody who wants to do their own analysis, help yourselves. It's downloadable from the department's website. Okay, so that's it. How have I done on time? Oh, not bad. Okay, and just lastly, say all these things can be downloaded from the department's website, where you can get all these 3 things: the report, the National Waste Database, and the reporting tool. That's the one where we collate all the data together and do those manipulations. So is hopefully, if you're a bit Excel savvy, reasonably transparent. Okay, I'm done.
Thanks, Jojo. That was great, and almost to time. Just a gentle reminder of a few things we might have got in late. If you've got any questions, please put it in the Q&A box. Putting your hand up, I won't come to you. We don't. It doesn't work that way, I'm afraid. And yes, we will be giving the recording and the presentation afterwards, so do not worry about that. No fear. We've got a few questions done to come in, Joe, which is terrific. But I might just ask you about some of the challenges with the lack of consistency of data across the jurisdictions. Does that have a real impact on what you're doing? Because I know what you said earlier about it's not perfect, but you know, perfectionism can be the enemy of progress. That wasn't me, that was Winston Churchill, by the way. So you know, I think it's awesome that we've got something in writing to talk about and argue about, but there are real challenges with those data gaps, aren't there? And where are the obvious ones?
Well, I think, well, look, one of the things that's really there is it just makes everything very complicated. I mean, I can say, yes, there's this transparent tool there, but you know, somebody else's Excel workbook is nothing more boring, is there? Your own is always very exciting, but somebody else's are. And so it is hard to penetrate, it makes things complicated and risks error. And we have had error in here. We've corrected a few from the past. So there is error risk in there. And you know, risks of misinterpreting and so on. Is this the same as that? It's not just the data, also it's even the regulations. Like what about construction and demolition waste going into a landfill? How thick can you make the road? Well, you know, if you're avoiding a landfill levy, you can make the road 2 meters thick. Does it count as recycling or not? Well, you know, that's going to vary from place to place. So it's inconsistencies with data, but also with regulations as well. I would say though, I mean, it's kind of funny to do this. We're talking about 2018-19. Here we are at the beginning of 2021. So obviously there's an issue there. Whereas on the other hand, there are people who have large numbers of facilities where they can see the truck emptying right now live. Okay, so if that is available somewhere, can we get it for state and territory reporting? Maybe one day. Right now, there's a whole bunch of problems in the way, and probably one of the biggest ones of it is legislated confidentiality provisions that stop this from happening. So somehow there's some big discussions need to happen, which would, in the end, if we can get everything right, we could have data much sooner, quicker, and more reliable. So we're working on a national standard for waste data and reporting, and hopefully that will also help straighten things out. But it's an ongoing journey.
And I think one of the issues with definitions too, you know, I guess we're going to get a lot of people asking us questions in the industry about clinical waste and where that is, right? So I'm assuming that's in hazardous. It's not broken out, but then I understand states don't actually even capture clinical waste. So how can we look at some of this trend issue when it's not being captured by some states?
Yeah, that's a difficulty. Look, with hazardous wastes, I mean, we do that separately and then import it into the to the national waste database. For some of them, there are gaps, and we estimate them where we think it's going to be similar in every state and territory per capita. So you're referring to New South Wales doesn't track
I didn't
that.
say that. I loved your little
I did.
about New South Wales. There's many reasons they're outliers.
Yeah. Well, look, New
Counting,
South Wales doesn't track that
recovery.
waste. We estimate it by looking at how much is generated per capita in all the other states and territories that do report it, and we estimate that. I don't think that's a big error. I don't think it's going to put us too far wrong. Some of the other ones, some of the other hazardous waste, if it's not tracked, there's nothing we can do, and it's just a gap. But there's not many of those. Generally, we find some way to do an estimate that seems reasonable where there is one. Another area is grease trap. Generally that's going to be similar per capita. So we've got it for some places, not for others. We estimate.
All right, so that's a good segue into Annie's question about definitions. What's the difference between other and mixed materials in the waste categories?
Between other and mixed materials. So we're talking about. Don't recall that. We're talking about this slide up near the front. Hang on.
So we might park that, Annie, because that might just take up a little bit of time. Isabel from, I'm assuming it's Axio from Tassie, asked about how did you extrapolate quantity of waste for industry source, i.e. agriculture, from the reported waste streams? Does the agricultural waste cover all streams? And I think you covered that off by talking about you took it from the MPI database.
No, not the agriculture ones. The agriculture ones we fished around and got what we could, but it's not complete. We haven't extrapolated. We've got what we could. So we've got certain things, like, for example, really what we focused on, and the report goes more into it, is things that might be interesting to composters. We try to look at manures and these concentrated sources, but we haven't attempted to say, okay, this is a definitive thing of what's an agricultural waste. I mean, you would have a grey fuzzy border there of what's a waste and what isn't, that would be bigger than everything else that we've put in this. So we haven't gone too much into that. I might mention here though that whereas we tend to focus on what the waste industry manages, of course this report is not just about what the waste industry manages, it's waste in a broader sense, and hence we push this further than the states and territories, where the focus is really regulation of the waste sector. This is trying to cover a broader scope, so hence the mining waste and the rest of it.
Can we talk about it as material management, not just waste? Because there's so much, like you talk here about the food management piece, and we're going to have a huge emphasis on avoidance. A lot of that avoidance isn't going to come to us. So we actually need to start understanding the pathways for that material, because it's not going to go out the gate if it goes to food rescue, for example.
Indeed. And look, I think and hope that the next time this report is produced in a couple of years' time, there'll be a bigger section on reuse than what we managed, and these upstream things where it doesn't really enter the waste stream. And we have had a crack, as I said, at material flow analyses for these 5 streams. We may be able to extend that in subsequent iterations, which then starts getting into the circularity and moving more. So we've got materials, flows from consumption right the way through, rather than just a sort of oh my goodness, here it comes, where did that come from, oh now we've got a problem, which has tended to happen for a long time, as you know. I mean, in a way there's something dumb about trying to drive materials management policy just because it's sitting there and you don't know what to do with it. We have to go way upstream and start thinking about that. I might point out here, remember when we changed from a wholesale tax to a GST?
I'm not that old.
Did we do? Oh, yes, you are. And we took the tax base off materials and spread it across all services for convenience, to make it nice and easy. But in effect, what we did is we made goods a little bit cheaper relative to services. So in a way, from a materials management perspective, we were doing the converse of what we may need to do if we try and get serious about this. When the price of stuff is going down, it's hard to say, okay, well, we're going to minimize it.
Well, actually, the price goes down because we externalize the true cost of managing it. But hey, don't start me on container deposits.
Okay.
That's a good segue into textiles. Like, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on textiles. We know, I think it's one of the top 3 carbon emitters, that industry globally. You know, we don't know much about that in some ways because it doesn't come across a weighbridge. So, you know, the numbers that seem to be floating around is about 800,000 to 1 million tons of material waste that comes in. But if we don't get a lot of that through the charities, and I guess I discovered recently that there's no onshore reprocessing. It's all exported, I believe. And you know, do we know if it's being recycled, or is it simply going off for rags and other things?
Oh, I think there's a whole ecosystem of things that's going to happen to it, but I do know for sure that there is to the point of you know, summer clothes going off to Africa and winter clothes going off to Eastern Europe. I know that sort of stuff is happening. I'm sure you come across those stories as well, but probably there's a lot of rags in it as well. Yes, most textiles that we report here as recovered, that we get from the state and territory, we can match it against export data and it's almost identical. The other big component is what goes into landfills. We get that from landfill audits, from which we extrapolate. That is a bit of a weakness in this picture, as in you wouldn't need to be far wrong when you've got a small percentage to have quite a big range in there. We don't have great composition data for the stuff that's disposed of, apart from extrapolating from audits.
So just a bit of a left field, we've got all these targets going forward of avoidance, and you know, are we on track? We've got 2030, we've got to go. Will we manage to hit our avoidance? Will we help? It's scary to see we're still second highest generator of material globally. You know, are we on track to reach that 2030 targets, do you think, Joe?
Well, I think that that big increase in construction and demolition waste has put a bit of a spanner in the works for those things, whether that will continue or not. I mean, those are mainly big projects in the major cities, and I think that quietened down in 18, 19. It was the 2 previous years where it was particularly big. We have got a table in there looking at progress against the targets, and if you took those progress, and I remember we're measuring it from 16, 17 and its achievement by 2030. 3 of them, the targets are numeric. When you extrapolate on those 3 years of data, it tells you, no, we're not going to get there based on that. But you know, if you've got a 13-year period and you're extrapolating on the first 3 years, when you're right now investing money and starting to get into efforts to meet those targets, it's not a good indicator of extrapolating. But you would have to say that so far, no, we're not on target to get there based on the straight line. It's too early though to say whether you know, to be able to say with confidence what that tells us now.
We're getting a lot of investment, which is a terrific thing, and a lot of attention. So I'm going to springboard with Mark Gifford. Lovely Mark Gifford. Hello, thanks for joining us. In terms of headline trends then, what do you see as the most problematic and requiring attention then?
In terms of achieving targets?
Just trends, but also with our targets in mind, given what we've committed to.
Look, I think waste generation, my feeling is that what we're looking at there is a blip and it will calm down. So I think the waste generation target, if we keep pushing away on waste minimization and waste avoidance, keeping it in the public eye and people keep initiatives, we could easily meet that target. So that wouldn't be the worrying one. You'd have to say though, on recovery rates, whether we can make 80%, that's probably a serious challenge for us. I think that's going to be hard for us to do. We're going to have to really get better at a lot of things to get 80% of this material scope recovered across the board.
I don't think that's about that less linear thought and more of a circular thought. You know, I think we're doing a lot of closed loop, but unless we start addressing eco and enviro design, we're not going to get there. Like it's not possible without starting to get clearer on what's accepted and what can be recovered and recycled and therefore designed. So the product stewardship piece is so key to what's going on. So what was the data point that surprised you the most, Joe? and what you've seen this year, because you've done so many of these.
Oh, well, look, that increase was I had to check and check and check. How come it was going down? Now it's going up. I had already prepared someone to do a piece on why is waste generation going down. Then we got the thing, oh my goodness, or per capita, and we saw, well, it's not going down, it's been going up. So, but we still put that piece in there because we still think there's an underlying trend there. That was a bit of a surprise, and I think probably a surprise for everybody. And that's what happens when we get very big major projects happening in the big cities. Yeah, we all need infrastructure, but it has a waste cost.
Unless we design it well at first instance, but that's another conversation. So do you think in future reports we'll be providing more detail on processing of recovered material by category? Do you think that's possible, or is there a real challenge, I guess, around that, with the sense of they're not necessarily licensed premises and they're not necessarily as transparent to those who are collecting the data?
No, I think it's going to get better, Gail. Look, across the board, I mean, I can say with great confidence, across the board, the states and territories are putting serious effort into keeping track of this. I think everybody was embarrassed by getting caught with this China thing. So, what a surprise, you know, when of course, in some ways, why was it a surprise? But it was partly a surprise because we didn't capture this in great detail. Now there's I think probably, you know, if there's a good side to exploding factories, it's because
there is no good side of that one, Joe.
well, at least it means that we make serious efforts to make sure it doesn't happen again. And part of that is data and capturing and keeping an eye on what's going on. So across the board, everybody is going, ACT has got this beaut new system where they're tracking basically every truck transporting waste in a similar way that we have done for a long time with hazardous waste. New South Wales has put enormous effort into its new data system. Victoria is gearing up for significant changes. Queensland made big changes too. WA is phasing in compulsory reporting from recycling. So I think across the board we can expect to see improvements for sure.
Oh, and I think the good thing out of China and other things is we are in the light and people want to understand us more, which is a good thing. Right? Getting that consistency is key. Paul James has asked, and I think the answer to this is no, but we can talk, is there data on the stockpile volumes of each waste class in each state, for example?
No,
so
no, there is not. No, look, there are some big stockpiles. There was certainly some issues with C&D waste in WA, which I think you'd be aware of, which I think they're getting on
the levy area.
Yeah. But also, I mean, there's other things like, let's say South Australia's got this great system of getting contaminated soil, and they basically put it in a pile and leave it there until they get a suitable major project where they can use it. Now, this is a pretty sensible thing to do rather than stick it in a hole if you've got the place where you can put it. But from a data perspective, it's a pain in the butt. What are we going to do with that? Traditionally, we get data by year. You say, okay, how much was generated? What happened to it? But if it's sitting there in a pile, right now we don't have a great system on that. So certainly there's a lot of soil and there's some C&D stockpiles. You'd have processed C&D materials as well, waiting for big projects, particularly with some of the big operators. They have large amounts of inventory. Metals is lying around all over the place. We saw this, how as soon as the price changes, it sucks in a load of metal. It's probably sitting in paddocks and who knows where. So no, but overall, we don't have a good handle on stockpiles. We've got to get that better, and it is another area. Drones are helping there. People are starting to use that to measure size of them. We really need to be able to measure stockpiles at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year and know what the increment is. That's where we need to head.
Or alternatively, and I might be wrong about this, but it's really mass balanced reporting based on sites who manage their sites. Because I think, stockpiling should not be a dirty word. It's a legitimate way of managing materials for a site. So I think it's also a bit more education about how stockpiling works, as opposed to it's maybe some just putting stuff somewhere else. So, again, it's just a great conversation. Just market coverage rates for stewardship schemes, how are they estimated? For example, Drummuster, Isabel says, is estimated to recover only 50% of all chemical containers in agriculture. How is that? Is that through the reporting through the stewardship schemes themselves?
Mostly, yeah, that's right. So we ask them. Look, we are in the hands of people who tell us things here. We do put a skeptical eye over pretty much everything that we get, but we're in their hands. That's what they report to us.
And I noticed the comment in the slideshow, I think, about the fact that the data around tyres is not what we would like it to be. And yet there's a voluntary scheme in that one. What are some of the challenges? And I guess it's going to be highlighted as we move towards the export ban too.
Indeed. Look, I think there's a couple of things. One is just the nature of tyres is it can easily be used for a bunch of things, like say farms use tyres for weighing stuff down and, you know, just around the place. So they get used somewhere and then they kind of disappear. And we've had stockpiles of tyres, you know, which have always been well publicised. And the fear that when you look at the data and you can't do the mass balance, oh my God, there's secret stockpiles lying around everywhere. And we had that for quite a few years. This report is written at the tail end of that. And I think now we're much better on top of it. Tyre Stewardship Australia has done a fair bit of some good work on this to try and track this down. But the other issue as well is that the exports of waste tyres is not occurring or has not been consistently occurring in the categories that are allocated to waste tyres. That is, people have put them in their new tyres and so on. So you're losing track of the stuff that's exported. And I think that's probably where there's some, can I say it again? Rubberiness in the data.
Oh, where the rubber hits the road even, Joe. In fact, Polestar, if you're listening, I might have misread the website today, but the last export data I could see was May 2020, and I reckon there's been a few months since then that needs to go up. But hey, I could be wrong. We've really kind of reached to the end of time, Joe, and I'm really grateful for your time. As always, there are some other questions there that absolutely we can go into and answer some interesting ones about circular economy indicators, but I think they're for another day. I've put in the chat the National Waste Data, the National Waste Report link for those who haven't seen it. It's a fabulous 100 pages of reading, so for bedtime reading, but also for nerds. And I've also, because it was a question about plastics recycling, people may not realise that there's some really terrific reports on it may come as a surprise, the Federal Agricultural Waste Environment or website, and particular longitudinal data around plastics. And it talks about plastic types and categories that Envisage, Kyle was mentioned earlier, has done. Helen also mentioned that APCO is looking at CDS, don't ask me why, but they're doing a report for later. So just keep your eye out on this space. There's an awful lot going on. We will do our best. There's some more questions coming in. We will definitely get Joe to do some more. Thank you very, very much, Joe, and the beautiful Carmen for being here today. Thank you to, we hit 202 people, I think, on the web today. That's fantastic. I feel like we've got a mini cough. So now if we can only just all get in a room and have a wine, that would be even better. Have a great Wednesday, isn't it? Have a fantastic Wednesday. We genuinely look forward to seeing you all very, very soon again, and have a great week. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.